Hello everyone and welcome back to Worldbuilding Films. This is the continuation of the Worldbuilding review of Steven Spielberg's Minority Report, and we still have a lot to cover here. So if you haven't seen the first part, feel free to go check it out for better context. And while you're at it, of course, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Now, enough chit chat, and let's continue with Narrowin. So, we speculated on all the ways precrime wouldn't have worked, and even then, the film presents a very black and white way of seeing the outcomes of precrime. It works completely, or one small flaw makes the whole system fall down. And to be fair, the ethics that this story plays with are absolutely fascinating and well executed. However, while storytelling-wise it is very impactful, I think they could have also chosen a middle ground. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's take it from the top one more time.
Okay, let's do this one last time, yeah?
We said that this is a world where surveillance is absolutely everywhere, regardless if it was caused by a possible war as was described in the original short story by Philip K. Dick, or if the trajectory of our modern society is just inclined to naturally gravitate towards that direction. Frustrating as that might sound, especially nowadays. At the same time, the streets have been flooded with a drug called Narrowin, which many people got hooked on. Children born from addict parents started to show signs of brain damage, and also revealed to possess the ability to see murders happening in the future. Only 3 survived beyond the age of 12 and became the precogs, starting the entire precrime program, and the rest is history. However, have you ever stopped to consider something a little peculiar? The whole plot is technically set off by John Anderton being given a vision that he will murder Leo Crow, but none of the events of the downfall of precrime would have happened if it wasn't for one scene earlier in the film. After Whitwer entered the temple by order of the federal government, something pretty much no one should be able to do, Anderton is left alone with the precogs for a couple of minutes, and it's only when they're alone that Agatha suddenly wakes up and gives Anderton a vision of what truly happened to her mother and Lively, which we later find out was one of the titular Minority Reports. Now, why would Agatha have this vision? Why would it happen now? Why would it be so intense as to wake her from her heavily sedated state? And why does she do this only to Anderton? Because without this scene, none of the events after this vision would have happened like this. It's like Agatha had been waiting for this very moment, but it couldn't have been. So what gives? Well, I think that all of this might have been a side effect of the Narrowin itself. If you recall, Dr. Eidman said to Anderton that Narrowin was what caused all of this, but that it was first an impure version of the drug, not like the quote-unquote
engineered cocktail that became so popular among the more educated.
This implies that Narrowin has been improved to the point that it completely stopped causing the risky side effects that would have created the precogs in the first place. Then, at the same time, during the film, we see that Anderton has been secretly and illegally taking another kind of drug called clarity.
Just need a little clarity.
You want the customary clarity or the new and improved kind of clarity?
In order to cope with the loss of his son Sean. A drug that of course is illegal to have, and even Whitwer tries to jail Anderton for. Now, to be clear, these are explained to be 2 completely separate drugs. I haven't found any particular link between the 2, so I won't claim that there is. However, narratively speaking, I propose that there should have been. So, from here on, this will be my personal theory on how to tie all of this together more properly. If these 2 separate drugs had actually been the same, or at least similar, with one of them improved, this could mean that even people like John Anderton could have been getting possible slight changes to their bodies, in the same way Narrowin caused the mutation for the precogs. Mind you, I'm not trying to say that this should give him and other addicts some kind of supernatural power. Not at all, he's still just a regular guy. However, what if this particular change was only to cause a very slight disruptive frequency to the collective mind of the precogs? And yes, I do mean collective, because as we said earlier, since the precogs together are able to see future murders, but Agatha has proven to be able to see across all of time if given a breather, perhaps their presence together might have actually been limiting their brains. With John's, however, it could have been just enough to make the most gifted of them, Agatha, tune out the others, even if just for a moment. Neurwin was the unrefined drug that gives these abilities individually, but at the cost of choking their full potential when together. Whereas Clarity, as the name implies, could have been the refined version that accidentally helped negate this collective disruption even while they're sedated. This would justify then why Agatha had suddenly jumped to him when they were alone, and only alone, to help him see the murder of her own mother. A plea for help that couldn't have been possible before, because Anderton was always on the other side of the glass and never close enough, because he's also not allowed in the temple, and even when he did enter, the presence of others was enough to tamper with his own neurological interference. Thus, it was only in this single occasion that something like this could happen against all odds. Now hold on, you're probably thinking that I'm being crazy here. Sure, the precogs are mutants, but they're like the one main exception here, right? After all, it's so rare that it's what jump-started all of this. But I personally think that there might be some evidence that John, and honestly other people in the world, are starting to have changes as well. And the key to that, believe it or not, is none other than Anderton's son, Sean. He was at a public pool having fun with his father, and all it took was a moment's distraction for Sean to fully disappear, making Anderton spiral into despair and obsession, get into precrime, get hooked on Clarity, and drive him to ensure that precrime had to work. And yes, it is sadly implied that whatever did specifically happen to Sean, he just didn't make it. But did you notice something weird about this? Sean got kidnapped and disappeared in a future where surveillance is almost everywhere. And yes, I get it that I proposed it might have some blind spots here and there, but look at this place. It's a damn public pool. Even assuming the culprit did just miraculously get away with all of these people around, why wouldn't there be eye scanners here as well? Sean is Anderson's son too, a cop. Someone who would have to spend his life looking around his back, because he could get jumped at any moment due to his profession, and he would need to ensure to be in a place where his own son would be safe when the option to do so is present. So how and why was no one able to find Sean anymore, especially when you have all of these goddamn eye scanners? Well, because I think something deeper is happening. What if, in the same way Neurwin has been causing side effects that lead to the precogs, other substances in the world, even unrefined ones, were also starting to have other side effects? Such as, for example, making sure that all the future generations like Sean wouldn't have eyes that have an eye signature anymore, and be among the first that won't be traced in the future. You might think that's ridiculous and that there's no reason to believe that, but it would make sense. This is a future where things are changing rapidly. Surveillance is everywhere. Crime had been on the rise. If we go by the original short story, it's possible that global wars could have been going on. New forms of energy, as I proposed before, would be making it very difficult to change things back anymore. People were so stressed and desperate that they were willing to replace or even gouge their freaking eyes out just to have some privacy. And on top of that, here you have a drug that literally caused mutations in children, to the point that a rare few gained an ability never before seen in the history of the human race. Well, answer me this. What do mutations do? They're a way to change and adapt when there is a particular change in your environment. Now, this happens very slowly across time and through generations. However, this is a future scenario in which humans have found a way to create a single drug that, even if accidentally, jump-started mutations to the point that some could see the future. So, since it was an unforeseen side effect anyways, What if other drugs, or hell, even just the refined versions of the original Neuroin, were still speedrunning changes in humans and their offsprings this whole time? Except, since they were improved, the changes weren't as drastic. The first doses caused a mutation that was so great and fast that very few kids survived it, but those who did got an ability that went overboard and leaped way beyond what the environment required, and it made them become the most important people on the planet. The others would have had other mutations too, but not lethal, much more subtle and in tune to their environment, such as making their eyes not be traced by exaggerated scanners anymore, or even more subtly, creating a passive counter to the 3 times evolution did overstep. Not to mention that these subtler changes are significant enough that they couldn't have happened on their own anyway, unless they had been done so artificially. Plus, hey, if freaking planets are becoming so mutated that they're moving like tentacles now, I don't see why this can't be the case. And yes, this does mean that everyone in the world would be aware that something is happening to the human race as a whole, and Anderton would have been aware that Sean was more at risk of disappearing. But then again, since the precogs were taking all the spotlight anyway, perhaps with some cases, religiousness would have been a bit more on the rise as a way to cope with dealing with a great change everyone was seeing coming from the horizon, so they wouldn't be focusing on the actual task at hand.
Everything's going to change now, isn't it?
And having said all of that, if you still don't think that this feels right, I would argue that it would not only add to the complexity of the film, but be in tune with its theme. Minority Report is a story all about the ethics of mass surveillance and morality, both in space as well as in time. But more specifically, it's also an exploration of the consequences of what happens when you go too far. Surveillance is too widespread even in the name of security, so people become desperate and overwhelmed. Drug addicts need to cope, and take something that causes what could have easily been seen as an aberration, like the precogs. The precogs could have been able to tell so much more, but are kept in an imprisoned environment that chokes them and causes too much trauma. A police force the likes of which had never been seen before is created to test the idea of finally stopping all crime in the world, yet does so with so much devotion and such an iron grip that if one single flaw were to ever be discovered, the entire system would collapse and cause more harm later than there ever had been before. That same police force had paradoxically created a new kind of religious devotion in this futuristic world that, when it would inevitably collapse, would frankly cause even more turmoil when the trust of all its new faithful followers would be broken. And even at the more personal character levels, those who became too obsessed with something would be the ones to suffer the most in the end, and just like nature, will have to adapt or die. This is a cautionary tale of what happens when we, as individuals and as a society, find a brand new shiny thing and forget to exercise caution. And yet, if it had followed the path that I just laid out, it could have simultaneously proven that the world doesn't have to be as black and white. If precrime hadn't been so strict on its infallible image, it could have at least tried to continue on by perhaps not imprisoning spur-of-the-moment murderers, and instead give them at least a chance to parley. If they hadn't kept such an iron grip on the precogs and also given them a slightly better life, they could have maybe seen far more than just the futures of only murders. Plus, criminals don't have to know when the precogs are working, so the fear of being caught would have been more than enough. If the drug addicts had controlled themselves a bit more, they wouldn't have birthed damaged children who would have been imprisoned or, more likely, died a horrible premature death. If the world's surveillance had relinquished a little more, there wouldn't have been a need for this drug to come into existence. And again, if this world hadn't been tightening its grip like the chord of a guitar, its future generations wouldn't have had a need to counter by evolving traits to elude that very same mass surveillance. Even freaking nature might be trying to say this, man. The true answer, as the characters prove themselves in their arcs, is to break free of this rigidity and allow yourself some slight messiness. Because like all great stories, if you want a better future, you learn to move on or you die with your cause, regardless of which one it may be. If nothing else, the only single silver lining in all of this, which people can latch onto, is the notion that, despite living in a world where both space and time are constantly watching you, there is always one thing that even the most supernatural of beings can take away from you, and that is the power to choose. And that, folks, was the world-building review of Steven Spielberg's Minority Report. Oh boy, I didn't expect I'd have this much to say about it. It's definitely one of those stories that packs several punches in a single runtime, and manages to leave you with all sorts of juicy questions about destiny, morality, justice, and more to chew on. Not to mention that it's also loaded with awesome action sequences and sci-fi concepts. Sure, maybe it could have fine-tuned some of the lore and logic of this world a little bit more, especially with how the precogs work, but then again, it still does a surprisingly good job, especially for its time, and especially when it had to do so in only one film. Extended projects notwithstanding. Whenever I think of high sci-fi concepts, Minority Report is easily one of the first ones that come to mind, and easily deserves all the respect that it got, both for the ideas proposed in Philip K. Dick's original short story, as well as the awesome execution of the Holy Emperor of cinema himself. And while even I have to sadly agree that this was the last truly historical, impactful film that Spielberg made so far, not that the other ones weren't good, but still, if there ever has to be one that represents the height of what he can do in the later stages of his career, this is definitely one that deserves to be seen and foreseen for all the rest of time. Anyway, that's all for today, folks. What do you think? Am I right? Am I wrong? Am I talking out of my ass? Maybe. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to click the bell for further notifications. Please subscribe to my Patreon to help support what I do here. It would be very much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on my Instagram page, as well as joining my Discord server for further discussions and to also find out what the future videos might be about. The links to all of these, of course, are down below. And if there's any other franchise whose world building you'd like analyzed, let me know. Until next time, keep building worlds! And by the way, real quick, this video is sponsored by me. Cause yes, my book, Grimm, has now been released in 3 languages, English, Italian, and German, and are all available on Amazon right now. It's a dark horror fantasy suspense story about a teenager who has the strange ability to see none other than the Grim Reaper. And one day he has to strike a terrible deal with the Reaper in order to save someone he loves. The reviews so far have been surprisingly good, and I thank each and every one of you who had a chance to read it. If you're also interested in giving it a shot, feel free to click the links down in the description below, or use the QR codes you see right here on the screen for each language. Give it a read, and feel free to leave a review, or let me know your thoughts on this channel's Discord server, also linked below. Thank you for listening, and see you at the next video.